My name is Thomas Reed. I'm 62 years old, and for most of my life, I've lived quietly. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I learned early on that silence was often cheaper than conflict. Silence didn't argue back. It didn't make promises it couldn't keep. It simply endured. I worked for over 40 years in construction, the kind of work that doesn't leave much behind except tired bones and hands that never quite heal. Long days, cold mornings, broken knuckles that you tape up and ignore because stopping means losing the job. I never complained about it. Complaining doesn't pour concrete or pay bills. I raised my son, Evan, alone after his mother passed away. There were no grandparents to step in, no backup plan, no one waiting in the wings if I got sick or fell behind. It was just the two of us, figuring things out 1 week at a time. I learned how to braid time together, how to work all day and still show up at night, how to be exhausted without letting it show. I never missed a rent payment, never missed a school meeting, never missed packing his lunch, even on nights when I slept less than a few hours and woke up before dawn to do it all again. What I didn't do was talk about my work. I didn't talk about money or how close we came to losing everything more times than I care to count. I didn't talk about the nights I sat at the kitchen table, running numbers that never quite worked out, telling myself that somehow it would be enough. I wanted Evan to grow up believing the world was stable, that things just worked if you tried hard enough. I thought that protecting him from the weight of reality was part of being a good father. That night when I stood in front of the mirror getting ready to meet his new family, I chose my cleanest jacket. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't fashionable. It didn't say anything about success or status. It just said, I showed up. And in my world, that had always been enough. The restaurant was the kind of place that made you straighten your back without realizing it. White tablecloths stretched perfectly across every table. Crystal glasses caught the light just enough to remind you they were expensive, and the room carried that quiet confidence money always brings with it. People spoke softly, not because they were polite, but because they expected to be heard without raising their voices. Evan's wife, Claire, sat beside him, her posture relaxed, practiced. Her parents were already there when I arrived, settled in as if the table had been waiting for them all along. No one stood when they saw me. No one smiled. There was a brief pause, just long enough for them to decide what I was, and then Claire spoke. She introduced me quickly, efficiently, the way someone reads a warning label they don't want to dwell on. This is Thomas, Evan's dad. Not Mr. Reed, not Dad, just Thomas. A name without weight, without context, without respect attached to it. I nodded and took the only empty seat, feeling like I had arrived late to something I was never fully invited into. Claire's father's eyes drifted down to my hands as I rested them on the table. I'd seen that look before, rough skin, small scars, the quiet evidence of years spent doing work that doesn't leave you clean at the end of the day. He swirled his wine slowly, as if giving himself time to choose the right tone, and then asked, So, Thomas, what do you do? His voice wasn't rude. It didn't need to be. I answered honestly. I work. That was it. No story. No explanation. No attempt to dress it up. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was measured, polite. The kind of silence that weighs your answer and finds it lacking without ever saying so. No one asked anything else. No one seemed curious. It was as if the conversation had reached its natural conclusion, and I had failed some quiet test I didn't know I was taking. When the waiter arrived and began describing the specials, Claire leaned toward me, her smile still in place, and whispered, Maybe don't order anything expensive. She said it softly, like advice, like she was looking out for me. I nodded without looking up and ordered water. I'd learned a long time ago that pushing back in moments like that only made things worse. Better to stay small. Better to stay quiet. Around me, the conversation picked back up, flowing easily over topics I didn't belong to. Investments, travel, people they all seemed to know. I sat there listening, hands folded, telling myself that I was just there to show up, that being present was enough. I didn't know yet how much silence that night was going to cost me. Halfway through dinner, Claire's mother laughed, the kind of laugh that sounded warm on the surface but carried something sharper underneath. She set her fork down and said, "You know, Evan always told us he had to work really hard to become who he is today. All on his own." There was a pause, just long enough for the words to settle, and then she lifted her glass. "To Evan," she said, smiling, "for breaking the cycle." Glasses rose around the table. They clinked softly, deliberately. I lifted my water and took a small sip, telling myself it was just a toast, just words, that they didn't need to mean anything more than that. Then Evan laughed. Not awkwardly, not nervously. He laughed like someone completely at ease, like someone who knew the room was on his side. He gestured toward me without even turning fully in my direction. "Yeah," he said, still smiling. "I mean, look at him." His hand hovered in the air for a moment, as if he were pointing out a piece of furniture. "He's kind of an embarrassment." The table erupted, not in shock, in agreement. Someone chuckled and said I was old school. Someone else waved it off and added, "Different generation." The laughter wasn't loud, but it was steady, comfortable, the kind that doesn't expect resistance. Evan leaned back in his chair, relaxed, enjoying the moment more than I think he realized. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and asked, "Why did you even come, Dad?" I felt my chest tighten in a way that surprised me. Not sharp pain, just pressure. Like something heavy had been set down right where my breath should be. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, slow and loud, and for a brief second I wondered if anyone else could hear it. I thought about all the things I could say, about how many nights I'd come home too tired to sit down, about the lunches packed, the bills paid, the years that disappeared into making sure he never felt the kind of fear I had grown up with. The words lined up in my head, ready. But I didn't speak. I kept my hands folded on the table. I kept my eyes steady, because if I said even one of those things out loud, everything would change. And at that moment, I wasn't sure he was ready to live with what that change would cost. 5 years earlier, Evan made a mistake. Not the kind you fix with an apology or a second chance, but the kind that follows you, quietly at first, and then all at once. He signed documents he didn't fully understand, trusted people who spoke confidently and smiled too easily, people who knew exactly how desperate ambition could make a young man. It started small, at least that's how he told himself. A promise of opportunity, a shortcut, something everyone else was already doing. Then came the phone call, late at night. His voice didn't sound like my son's voice anymore. It sounded thin, afraid. He said my name the way he used to when he was a child and had broken something he didn't know how to fix. I didn't ask him to explain everything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tell him he should have known better. I just listened. And when the call ended, I sat there in the dark for a long time, staring at the wall, understanding exactly what was at stake. If the truth came out, it wouldn't just hurt him. It would follow him everywhere. Jobs he would never get. Doors that would close before he even knocked. A label that would stick no matter how hard he tried to outgrow it. So, I took care of it. Quietly. I made calls. I met people I never wanted to meet again. I did what fathers do when there's no good option left, only the least damaging one. I sold something I had spent my entire life building. Not for profit, not for recognition, for protection. The kind of protection that leaves no paper trail back to you if you're careful enough. When it was done, the problem disappeared. Just like that. Evan never asked how. He didn't need to. All he knew was that the weight lifted, that the future he'd been so close to losing was suddenly back within reach. I watched him move forward, confident again, lighter, unaware of what had been exchanged for that relief. And I promised myself something that night. I promised that he would never feel indebted to me, that he would never carry the burden of knowing what his mistake had cost. I thought that sparing him that knowledge was an act of love. I didn't realize then how expensive that promise would become, or that one day it would come due at a dinner table in front of strangers, disguised as laughter. The waiter returned with the bill, placing it neatly at the edge of the table, right within Claire's reach. She moved without hesitation, already half smiling, already prepared to handle it the way she handled everything else that night. But before her fingers touched the leather folder, someone else stepped closer. It was the manager. His posture was formal, respectful in a way that immediately felt out of place. He didn't look at Evan. He didn't acknowledge Claire or her parents. His eyes went straight to me. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Mr. Reed, it's an honor to have you here." The table went silent, not gradually, instantly. Conversations from nearby tables seemed to fade into the background, like the room itself had decided to listen. The manager continued, his tone calm, professional. "I just wanted to personally thank you," he said. "This entire property exists because of your decision years ago." Claire's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Her mother's smile stiffened. Claire's father frowned, clearly confused, and asked, "I'm sorry, what?" The manager smiled politely, the way people do when they believe the answer is obvious. "Mr. Reed sold us the land this restaurant stands on." No one spoke. Not a laugh. Not a question. Not even a breath that felt normal. This wasn't the polite silence from earlier, the kind that judged quietly. This was something else. Heavy. Dense. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you suddenly aware of how loud your own heartbeat sounds. Evan stared at me, his mouth slightly open, trying to connect pieces that didn't seem to fit together. Claire slowly set her fork down, as if she needed both hands free to understand what she had just heard. Her father's face shifted, the confidence draining out of it in real time. The manager waited a moment longer, nodded respectfully in my direction, and stepped away, leaving us all sitting there with the truth, exposed in the middle of the table, where no one could pretend not to see it anymore. Evan finally turned toward me. Not the casual glance he'd given me earlier, not the distracted look of someone half listening, but a full turn of his body, as if he needed to face me to make sense of what was happening. "What land?" he asked, his voice lower now, uncertain, stripped of the confidence it had carried all evening. I didn't rush to answer. I took a moment, letting the weight of the room settle, letting him feel the pause the way I had felt so many others in my life. Then I looked at him. Really looked at him. "The company," I said quietly. "The one you thought failed." The color drained from his face so fast it startled me. His eyes flickered, searching his memory, replaying conversations he'd never questioned, explanations he'd accepted because they were convenient. I could see the realization forming piece by piece, like a picture coming into focus too late. "That money," I continued, my voice steady even as my chest tightened, "was used to clean up Your mistake. The words didn't come with anger. They didn't need to. They were simply the truth, finally spoken out loud. Evan swallowed hard, his mouth opening as if he wanted to say something, anything, but nothing came out. Claire leaned closer to him, her hand gripping his arm. She looked at me now, not with judgment or control, but with something closer to disbelief. You let us think, she started, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence. I nodded once. I did. I didn't explain myself. I didn't justify it. There was nothing left to justify. I had made that choice years ago, and I had lived with it every day since. Watching my son move forward, succeed, build a life he was proud of had seemed worth the cost at the time. Being respected had never been my priority. Making sure he didn't lose everything was. The table felt smaller now, like the truth had pushed in from all sides. No one laughed. No one spoke. Even Claire's parents seemed unsure where to look, their earlier confidence replaced by a careful stillness. The manager returned quietly and placed the receipt in front of me, not sliding it across the table but setting it down gently with both hands, like it deserved respect. "No charge tonight, sir," he said softly, then stepped back again, leaving us alone with what had been revealed. I stood up, slowly, not to make a point, not to command attention, just because it was time. My chair scraped lightly against the floor, the sound sharper than it should have been in the silence. I didn't look around the table. I didn't wait for permission. For the first time that night, I didn't stay seated where someone else had decided I belonged. Evan came to my house the next morning. I knew it was him before I opened the door. Some sounds carry history with them, and his knock did. It wasn't confident. It wasn't careless. It was the knock of someone who had stayed awake all night, replaying a moment he couldn't undo. When I opened the door, he was standing there with his shoulders slumped, his eyes red, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He didn't try to explain himself right away. He just started crying, the kind of crying that comes when the truth finally catches up and there's nowhere left to run. He apologized, over and over, the words tumbling out of him without structure, without pride. He begged me to understand, begged me to forgive him, begged me not to walk away the way he suddenly realized I could have at any point in his life. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't raise my voice. I let him say everything he needed to say, because sometimes people need to hear themselves before they can hear anyone else. When he finally ran out of words, I felt a calm settle over me. Not relief, not anger, just clarity. I told him something I had never said before, something I had carried quietly for years. I said, I didn't stay silent because I was weak. He looked up at me then, really listening. I paused, just long enough for the truth to land the way it deserved to. I stayed silent because I loved you. I opened the door wider, not to invite him in, but to let him see that the conversation was over. Love doesn't always sound gentle. Sometimes it sounds like honesty that comes too late. I closed the door behind him, slowly, without slamming it, without drama, just a simple final motion. And for the first time in a long time, the silence that followed didn't feel like something I was carrying alone. Sometimes, the people who laugh at your silence don't realize it's the only thing holding their world together. They mistake restraint for weakness and patience for absence, never asking what was sacrificed so they could stand where they are. Silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's a choice made out of love, paid for over a lifetime, and understood only when it's finally gone.